And now I see it.
All right. So welcome everyone to this housing seminar being hosted by Congregation Bay DCB, congregation located at 382 Hamilton Avenue, Brooklyn, New York, in the Red Hook section of Brooklyn. And we have a friend to the congregation, even a person who I've known over 20 years, known her family, husband, everyone. 20 years go past so quick. We were just teenagers when
Yep.
we when we met, but she's now a lawyer working in behalf of the people, mostly our people who might need this type of help. My sister, Corinthia Azaniah Carter, lawyer, is currently a staff attorney at Brooklyn Legal Services NYC, Local 2320. She
We're a
published a,
unionized workplace, so I have to say
a
that. Shout that out.
unionized. She published a law review article on police violence and hashtag activism. She holds a master's in political science and a master's of human resource management. She is currently a member of the NYC Bar Association's Diversity Pipeline Initiatives Committee and an appointee of the Mayor's Commission on City Marshals. So I welcome my sister, Azania. How are you, my sister?
I'm
Attorney.
good. Thank you for having me. I
Hallelujah.
appreciate it.
How are things going, and how what made you come to this point as far as wanting to do a seminar of this type in order to do outreach for the people in the community?
Well, knowing that housing, the majority of housing is held by Black and Brown people as renters, and being a housing attorney, seeing it day in and day out, who comes before court. Um, but even before I even started practicing, when I was interning, I kind of always knew in the law school that I went to, that I graduated from, I knew I wanted to do work that'll be helpful to my people. Um, and not just about making money. I want to be able to sleep at night. Um,
Right.
and I had the pleasure of now in the different units that they have, which I'll talk about. Um, but particularly this time when people are facing, unemployment and other issues, I know myself and others in my office, even though we're attorneys, we've been meeting with elected officials and trying to fight the fight outside of, of just the courtroom, because the landlord's bar has been pushing for evictions for some time now and pushing to the court for the courts to reopen. And we know this is not going to change. The fact that so many people lost jobs, that's not fixed right away. Um, so we know, it's an ongoing fight and battle. And there's a lot of different organizations and tenants movements happening right now to kind of support, and stop the onslaught of evictions that are soon to come, if we don't really fight against it. Yeah. So that's kind of
So
what brought me here.
so just a rule for everyone. She's gonna make a presentation. She has a slideshow. I believe it's a Google slideshow that she's gonna present. She's gonna go through all of the scenarios and all of the things that are happening at this moment. And then after that, we're going to have a question and answer. If you have any questions as she's going along, you could take down notes. It's very important to take down notes so that you could come back and you could ask any questions that you might have in regards to what it is that she's presenting to us this evening. I hope that this will be a template, and I hope that this will be something that we could continue in order to help us out and know everything that's coming down the pipeline, because there are a lot of things that they have in store for the city that we don't know about, and someone on the inside that's an attorney that knows all of the moves is very beneficial to us, for us to know our next moves and know what we have to do as they're making these plans. So without any further ado, my sister, you could go ahead and make your presentation.
Shalom all, and I'm just thankful to be here in this space. Um, Thankful to Creator for allowing me to be here, and also thank you for DCB for having me. And I hope everybody had a meaningful fast, those who keep Yom Kippur. And I'm going to get started. And, feel free if you want to put your questions in the chat. I'll try to get to them when I'm finished the presentation as much as possible. Okay, so let me get started. Everybody seeing that? Okay, so just to tell you a little bit about my organization. Sorry, let me fix it. Presentation real. So I'm in Brooklyn Legal Services, but the larger organization is Legal Services NYC, and we're located in all 5 boroughs. Our largest unit is housing, but we have a number of services that we provide. Pretty much every civil legal service you could possibly think of. So we do immigration law, we have workers' rights and benefits, we have where we do unemployment issues, we do elder law, we have an elder unit, we have I'm trying to remember all of them. We have a debt unit. We also have economic development. We have an education unit that do a lot of cases against the DOE. We have immigration. We have just a myriad of different units. So definitely, I'll send that information after. You can reach out if you have any for some of our other units. And also, even within our housing unit, we have units that are dedicated to represent buildings. I represent individual tenants, but we have those that represent buildings, and we have an office in Brooklyn located in East New York, and we have another one that particularly deals with Flatbush buildings, and they work heavily with the Flatbush Tenants Coalition. So there's me. I've been there in 2017, but I had interned in an organization since 2015 after I did my internship with a judge. I've worked in the immigration unit and the workers' rights unit, and I've done some elder law. So here's the agenda for today. So we're going to talk about just general rights and the different types of housing, the housing law, and with respect to COVID-19, there's been change, and it's an ongoing thing. So something today may change tomorrow. Things are changing rapidly in the court. And as you can see, like just the most recent announcement from Governor Cuomo extending the eviction moratorium. And I'll get more in detail into that because it's not a blanket moratorium that covers everybody. The same thing with the CDC's moratorium. And then I'm going to talk to you a little about what you do when you get a housing court case, when you have a case, if you've received papers from the court. So first, New York is a no, well, let me start. New York, landlords can't engage in self-help, meaning they can't just come and lock you out of your apartment and throw your stuff out. They do that, and that's called a legal lockout. So you can fight it and get your rights to go back in their apartment. But what happens is, like, it's actually the courts that have to allow. You have to go through a court proceeding, and the courts that has to come to the decision that you should be evicted. You can't and should not be evicted without first going through the court process. And again, that it does happen. There is, like I said, there is a thing called legal lockouts that landlords do. And if that happens to you or anyone you know, you immediately go to court and file an emergency lockout case. The courts are not open to everyone, to the general public, but they are open for emergency lockouts and repair issues. So even if you owe your landlord rent, they have an obligation to provide you with heat, hot water, and make necessary repairs. A lease is a contract, and they have to hold their part of that contract, as well as they expect you to pay your rent and hold up your side of the contract. Also, in your lease, your landlord can prevent you from having family members come live with you or having a roommate. Those are basic rights that we have as tenants and that tenants have. So in New York City, there are basically a couple of types of housing. Rent stabilized or rent controlled, which is covered under the Division of Housing and Community Renewal. They pretty much make sure that the landlord cannot increase your rent but to a certain amount, and that's regulated by the Rent Guidelines Board. And you can always look that up, the Rent Guidelines Board. And if you're in rent stabilized housing or rent controlled housing, you can go to Hanson Place and get a copy of your what is called a rent registration. And the landlord is supposed to file it every year. Unfortunately, it's self-reporting, so they may not be truthful, but that may mean that you are entitled to, they could be overcharging you or your rent is illegal. And you have to get that money back. There's also Section 8 housing, where people have Section 8 vouchers. There's J51. There's just a lot of different regulations, and it all depends on if, like, J51 is a tax break. So with that kind of information, to find out more information about your building and what you it may be under, you can look at, which I'll pull up later on at the end. I gave Chief Luzelle a copy. It's Just Fix It. And you can pull up your address, and it links you to all the agencies connected to your building. So you can see ownership papers from Acris. You can see HPD to see if there's any violations on the building, any outstanding violations. You can also see, trying to think of what else to list. You can see building plans, any repairs, any permits they put in, and that kind of stuff, and see if there is, if they're up to date with their documentation. And you can do the same for unregulated housing. And unregulated housing just means that that particular housing doesn't fall under rent stabilized and other regulated housing. So if you see a 2-family house, sometimes, most times, that may fall under unregulated housing, but there are times when it can be considered a de facto rent stabilized. And that can be if the landlord rents out individual rooms, but it has to be built before 1974, and it has to be 6 or more units. But if the landlord is renting out individual rooms, if you have a case, a holdover case, which I'll go into more details about, you may be able to, as a defense, argue that it's de facto rent stabilized, because they're renting each room to individual people, and it could create a 6 or more unit building. Or if they're renting, like, say there's 3 rooms on each floor, and 3 rooms on one floor, 2 on another, and they're renting out the basement, which could be a legal apartment, but you may be able to use that as an argument. So here's some more information about rent stabilized, as I was saying. It has to be built before 1974, 6 or more units. There's certain tax credits that can be covered. And it has to be certain, not deregulated, but through high vacancy or high income decontrol. And sometimes you may be able to get that reversed. For example, myself, I've lived in my building for 20 years, but I used to live upstairs. And I moved to a larger apartment. And this is before I knew, my rights. I was just about to start law school, and my landlord told me, my apartment was no longer rent stabilized. It went through a bunch of repairs. So lo and behold, I decided to file an overcharge claim and to file a claim to find out what the status of my apartment was. And after like about 2 years, I think the decision came down after I graduated, right before I was in my second year, and in my second year of law school. And he ended up having to make my apartment rent stabilized and also give me $30,000 because he was overcharging me. So even though, your apartment may say it's deregulated, you may have a way to fight it. And I've had cases, I do a number of overcharge cases where I've gotten tenants to get their apartment, which was once deemed deregulated by the landlord. So you can't always go by what they say, but they were able to get it rent regulated. And the importance of having rent regulated housing is you can't put a price on it because of the number of protections that you have when you have that, if you're able to. Because that's a housing stock that has dropped dramatically over the years because landlords did a lot of illegal activity to get apartments deregulated. So here are some of the rights, and I've said them already. You do get a renewal lease. There's even a form if your landlord fails to give you a renewal lease. There's a form on the DHCR's website for that you can file a complaint and they'll have to give you a renewal lease. And the thing is that even if they don't give you the renewal lease, they can't increase your rent until you have a fully executed lease. So sometimes landlords won't give a lease, but then you'll see an increase in your rent. They can't have it both ways. And they have to wait till that lease is executed before they can charge you the increased rent. And I'm going to go into a little more about the rent increases, particularly because they're coming in for this year. October 1st, they start. So I have a chart that'll show that a little later, what it is for those people that are rent stabilized, see their increases. And you can file an overcharge claim, which I've done. You can also, when you're rent stabilized, if your landlord's failing to do repairs in your apartment or in your building, you can file a rent reduction order. Which means your rent will be reduced until they do the repairs that they're required to do under the law. And, you don't ever have to accept a buyout. So I know, again, with me, an example, I know when my landlord started with me, I knew what was happening in the area. It was about 11 years ago now. I knew what was happening in the area, and I knew if he started with me, he's going to start with other tenants. So I put folders together with everybody for their rights. I reached out to a nonprofit and they came in and they got lawyers, which just happened to be the organization that I'm with now. Didn't know I was going to be working with them at the time. I was just starting law school. And, people took buyouts. Some people took they took the first thing the landlord offered, which you never do. And they felt pressured. We have to. I mean, even as recently as earlier this month, or last month, my landlord offered to pay me, to move me into a luxury high-rise, 10 years worth of rent for me, which I declined, of course, because there are many reasons. But the kind of tactics they use to kind of seduce you in a way to give up your apartment, and if they're offering you that, then it's more valuable than they're saying. So going to the rent increases. So recently, I think it's a couple months ago, the Rent Guidelines Board voted, which they do annually, particularly keeping in mind what's happening with COVID, to increase, and let me know if I'm talking too fast, because I tend to do that. Increase the rent starting October 1st. You can, if you renew your lease, you can do it at 0%. And if you decide to do a 2-lease renewal, it'll be increased by 1%. So, you don't have to, it's not a gamble. I don't know what next year would be if they will increase it. But if you feel you can't do it and you just want to keep your rent what it is now, you can do the 0%, but you're always going to be guaranteed um, a lease renewal. And your lease renewal always should give you the option of choosing a 1 or 2 year lease. I've seen times where landlords choose the options for tenants and that's improper. Be sure you have the option to choose whether 1 or 2 year leases. So with unregulated housing, it's fewer rights, a lot less rights. Your landlord could generally increase your rent as much as they want. If they're saying there's like repairs and stuff like that, they don't have those restrictions on as they do with regulated housing, particularly rent stabilizer, rent control. They don't have to offer you a new lease when it expires. And if they don't offer you a new lease and it expires, then they can, and you stay in the apartment, and they can bring you to housing court and do what is called a holdover proceeding. And there's a number of different holdover proceedings, but it is a holdover proceeding. You may have defenses for that, but they do have the right to bring you to court if you don't have a lease. Yeah, so it's like really, it's a tough kind of situation. So these are some of the ways they can increase the rent. And when you don't have a lease, after your lease expired, you're considered a month-to-month tenancy. So they would have to give you notice, but they can effectively terminate your lease. Give you notice. If you don't move, then they can file court papers. So one of the things that tenants are doing is harassing individuals. Unfortunately, housing court does not allow, let me just check something. I'm sorry, I'm seeing messages. I was just seeing something. Sorry about that. But I could see messages, but I can't. Unfortunately, housing court only allows tenants to bring harassment, can do affirmative litigation by bringing harassment cases against their landlord. And there's only one part that it does that, and that's called the HP part, where you can bring harassment claims against your landlord. And you can also bring repairs claims if they're failing to do repairs, or you can bring, and we have clinics, monthly clinics, so I can always, people can call our hotline number, which will be at the end, and they can see when, usually at the first month, to see where they want to, they can learn how to file one, and stuff like that. But you don't have to, you don't have to share certain information with your landlord. Definitely keep notes. If possible, you can record. You can record them. New York is a state where you don't have to get consent from the other party to record them. And everything keep a trail, because it's important, because that's just facts intensive, and the more support you have for your claims, the more helpful it is. And failure to do repairs can be considered harassment at a time. That's why when it is a repairs issue, you can do both. Okay, so getting to the eviction moratorium. Now, I know recently we've seen that the CDC came down with this eviction moratorium, but I don't think people understand it's not really, it's somewhat helpful in certain instances, but people have to complete this declaration, which can, if they found that they're lying, they could be in trouble for that, penalty for perjury. But the declaration, just pretty much you have to tell them that you tried to do, I'm just reading it here. You tried to do your best efforts to get government assistance. You make less than $99,000 a year. You're unable to pay your future rent, your rent due to, your full rent due to COVID and loss of household income, basically. You made your best efforts to pay partial rent. that if you're evicted, you'll go into a shelter or you'll be homeless, and you understand you're still under obligation to pay the rent. And it's only temporary, and it expires December 31st, 2020. So, and it's a form that you have to fill out and make this affirmative. You have to make this declaration. So it doesn't seem to cover every single household, because there are people that were still working. It's people that are holdover proceedings that are not covered, seemingly. And New York recently, as I said, well, more recently than the CDC's announcement, Governor Cuomo extended the eviction moratorium until January 1st. And the issue with that is that, again, it does not cover every type of housing court case. He pretty much extends what he called was the Safe Harbor Act. And that also points to tenants who suffered a loss during COVID. So again, if you had a holdover case or different cases prior to COVID, you may not be covered or protected. So that's the problem with that. And it's also, again, it's an affirmative defense. It's not something that is automatic. If they bring a case, a housing court case against you, you have to assert it. So I think people should definitely be aware of it and don't think everyone is saved from being evicted. I think individuals that, I advise people that individuals that are able to pay their rent, they should as much as possible, because even with the moratoriums, it doesn't get rid of your obligation to pay the rent. So it will be owed. That's why you see tenants movements fighting for rent cancellation, and also, in addition to rent cancellation, trying for the government to kind of assist small landlords with their mortgages, and because there are those who rely on tenants to pay their mortgage. Because we know this is not something that's going to change. The job loss was tremendous, and even when January comes, there's not going to be magically an increase in jobs where people are going to be back where they were pre-COVID. So it's a long-term fight. So going with respect to the opening back of housing court, like I had said earlier, there's a conversation before I started the presentation. There is a fight by many outside of housing court to prevent the court from opening, because we know the onslaught of evictions that will happen if landlords get an opportunity to evict people. So the court right now, they're not, from the most recent information that we got, and again, this information changes on a daily basis sometimes, is that they're not starting new cases. So people can't answer these cases right now. If you got a case or something during the summer, I think the court sent out some cards between June and August, and those cards had incorrect information on how to case. So if you got a card, then you may want to wait until the court is sending out a new set of cards with a court date, and that's when you answer. If people try to answer it, first, if they go in person, they're probably going to tell you to go to wait court. And if you try to answer via the phone, or you mail in your answer, you run the risk of it getting lost and the possibility of you losing some of your defenses if you do that. So it's best just to wait. And if you need to call 311 just to get updates on what could be happening, because again, there's still no new cases being heard. They're still going through the hundreds of thousands of cases that the court has right now. So this is what happens if you get a housing court case. Your landlord's required to give you. This is particular for if it's a non-payment case. It'll say the months that you owe, and stuff like that, and they give you opportunity to pay it. Now, this is where you can see it's important to keep good documentation. Like if you pay by money order or whatever, always or check, always in that little section, the note section, put what month and year it's for, the rent, earmark it. You can always show, well, no, my landlord, no, you can tell, you say, listen, I paid this amount on this time. Why wasn't it applied? So for one of the cases that I have, my client, they brought her, I didn't find this out till like after, like I think her fifth case. I had her on the fifth case. They had brought her to court. Well, they had filed court proceedings 5 times in 2 years. And we came to find out during this case that I had with her that they just failed to credit her 2 months over the course of those 2 years. They failed to credit her, and her money order and rent was earmarked. I mean, we had to do subpoenas and get all this information to show that they cashed it and everything. They just did bad accounting. And because of that, I actually filed a federal case against them on behalf of our client, because it's against federal law to bring someone to charge someone or bring someone to court for rent that they already paid or for a debt they already paid. So the landlord's attorney acting like a debt collector, they fall within the scope of that law. And we kind of did it just to send a message to them, like, you can't do this to people because you put people on edge. Like this particular client, she had judgments that she didn't know about. And there she was paying her rent, doing what she's supposed to do as a tenant, and their bad record keeping, had them bring all these cases against her. So this is what the papers look like. If you've never seen one, when it's a non-payment proceeding, it'll say right here what type of proceeding it is. If it's a holdover, it would say, and it'll go into detail with respect to, all this information, what months they claim are owed, and also whether it should say, if it's rent stabilized, it should say that. If it's under rent control, it should indicate that. Or if it's under Section 8, like NYCHA Section 8 or HPD Section 8, or even DHCR Section 8, they should say that, and those agencies should actually also be included on the court papers. And then this would be, if you were to file an answer, this is what the answer would look like. Generally, we tell people to check everything, just in case you don't want to miss out. When people get represented, I know we generally do an amended answer that goes in a little bit more detailed. But you can't go wrong with checking everything. It's better than than missing some things, and then you can't raise those defenses later on in your case. So with respect to a holdover, it's pretty much the same thing, and you have to review the petition. You don't have to answer as you would in that, but you have to have certain notice. Like if it's a nuisance case, which I'll talk a little bit more about, then they'll give you a notice to quit. You go in front of the judge, and you'll raise your defenses, and you can ask to submit an answer. So some of the reasons why, if you're rent stabilized, why they can bring holdover cases against you: if you breached your lease, there's various reasons. You have to know what your lease says. Always keep a copy of your initial lease. That controls everything. Even if you have renewal leases, if, for example, a new owner takes over the building and you've been in that building for 15 years and you have a pet, the new owner can't now make a rule that there's no pets if that was not in your initial. You get to keep your pet because the new owner steps into the shoes of the old owner. So they're required to follow that piece. Nuisance. So if some of you are familiar with hoarder cases, landlords tend to bring those cases, and we generally see it with our older clients, or sometimes clients with mental health issues. There's also the illegal use in drugs and prostitution and gambling. Those are, things that you can't, especially they can try to remove you from your apartment for that. You fail to renew a lease, maybe you didn't receive it or something, they can bring you to court. And generally those cases end quickly because the client will sign it there, and then that'll be the end of that. And licensee holdover. So in that kind of case, there's the cases where if it's a succession case, so say you live with a family member, like you live with your mother or father, or a sibling or grandparent, and that person either moves out or passes away. If you live with them for the statutory period, which is 2 years, generally 2 years before they vacated the apartment, or 1 year if you have a disability, then you can your defense would be you have succession rights, and it's document intensive for those type of cases, and you'll essentially, if all goes well, you'll take over their lease, and you won't have any increases besides the increases by the rent guidelines board. So that's one of the licensees holdover. Those are generally that kind of cases. Those kind of cases, and another case is, I don't think it's there. Another case is if which is similar, documentation is similar to what you would do for a succession case, is a non-primary residence. So that's if someone has a rent stabilized apartment, but their landlord's arguing that they live somewhere else for more than 100, I believe 183 days a year. Then you also got to show for those 2 years from when they brought the case that you lived in that apartment, and show your relationship to that apartment, which is exactly what you would show in a succession case. You pretty much, like your tax documents, any important documentation that would go to that primary residence, or that home that you claim, that apartment that you claim you've lived for the past two years if you're succeeding. And no grounds holdover is essentially when it's unregulated housing. Basically really don't have many defenses, even you can try, but you pretty much have to get time to move out. When the law passed, the HSTPA, the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act, that passed last year, June 2019, it allows for the court to give people a little bit more time to move out. I think the court can give them up to a year. In those cases, basically, you're pretty much trying to get the tenant as much time to move out if they don't really have any meaningful or like heavy defenses. So yeah, so this goes into that kind of stuff that I was just talking about. So there are times when, the court will say it's okay to evict you. And non-payments, it's if the owner is exposure and failed to pay their mortgage, then it gets taken over. So that would lead to a person having to be evicted because they're no longer the owner, and they will get time to move out, but it may not change. And that's a non-payment that's not rent stabilized. So that's different. If you're rent stabilized, that landlord takes over, steps in the shoes of the old landlord. So your rent, you're still rent stabilized. Your rent, you don't see a drastic rent increase and stuff like that. You just have to follow the rent guidelines board. And in non-payment, tenants can generally try to get it a one-shot deal, which is also called a rent arrears grant, which HRA helps. It's a no interest loan, basically. The HRA gives people, as long as you can show that you can pay your future rent, they'll pay your rental arrears. Thankfully, right now, when people are working, clients that I had that are working and stuff, or started working, HRA is pretty good at paying them off pretty quickly and just to make sure people are not evicted. And, people can be in debt for tens of thousands of dollars for whatever reason. And HRA has been helpful or helping us work with other parties to get their arrears paid. And again, with holdovers, it all depends on the type of holdover. And, tell people to file if say the court, if you're in a holdover and you say, okay, I'll move out and find an apartment in 3 months, 4 months, I'll move out. And you're unable to, you should really keep any documentation showing that you've been searching for an apartment. And you may want to file what's called an order to show cause, which is basically a motion to ask the court for the court to put the case back on the calendar since it was already settled, and to ask the court for more time for you to move out. And this is like housing court is set up in a way how we get our cases, my organization, and like Legal Aid and a number of other nonprofits that do this work. Before COVID, it was anyone can get a free attorney that day that your case was on. And it would be based on income and zip code. This is what it was. These are the zip codes now. And this is the income base. But right now, due to COVID and knowing that a number of folks having issues, HRA opened up a hotline which anyone can call. They'll be transferred to any provider. Anyone can call, and it doesn't matter what zip code they're in, and they'll get free legal advice. And people that have active housing cases can get representation from any zip code. And they're still trying to figure out the income qualifications, just because we know people may be in between and need that legal assistance. And here's the information for our hotline. So people can call, and again, you can see the list of all the different, and it's just a small list of the different things that we do in our office. And that's that. I'm just going to pull up one more document so everybody can have this. And I guess, Chief, is that we can try to figure out to email if you want it, which goes into different websites that can get you information, different web links. I know I spoke a lot.
No, that was good. That wasn't a lot. That was good.
Okay, there we go. Let's see. Our throat is dry. Feel free to ask me any questions.
Okay, so I want everyone to unmute your mics and just give our sister Azaniah a hand for that excellent presentation. Thought that it was great. Show her some love for
wonderful.
taking
Excellent, Miss Young.
Very info.
Yeah, it was taking time out of her busy schedule, especially now with everything that's going on. There, a lot of the work is coming into them, and someone who feels like they need to help out the community is someone very special, and we have to keep that in mind, and we have to give due respect to people like that who constantly thinking about their people and trying to help us and put us in a better place. So at this time, I see that there was a question on the chat. I don't know if you could see it. It was earlier.
Is it true that okay? Is it true those who live in HUD housing? Okay, so you're talking about surviving family member that lives in those programs. Well, they'll have to show and prove. Those programs are a little different, and they usually have a handbook. They have a HUD handbook that pretty much covers surviving family member or the who is eligible to take over, possibly take over the apartment. So it'll be specific to HUD, the HUD handbook. But generally, people should make sure they're on the family always. If you're taken off at some point, at least you can, if you can show that you were once on it, they may be able to, if you get legal counsel, I would definitely say seek legal counsel. They may be able to put you back on, but at least you show at some point you were on the family composition. And sometimes people delay it and they don't do it right away. Try to do it as much as possible and get proof. But when you go to the management office, they should stamp whatever documentation you give them. Make sure you have that copy, because you can show, if they can lie and say, well, we never got it, but you have your proof that you went and sought to file it, and just document everything.
Thank you. I have a question. I know you touched on it, so just to clarify, so a lot of what's been happening, or some of the things that's been happening, is some of these tenement buildings might have been owned by one landlord, and then another landlord takes over. Is it legal for that new landlord that took over to almost try to push out the tenants that been there, or they begin to use dirty tactics? And can you just reiterate what's the law
So
for
if you're
that?
talking about, well, in no instance, landlords should try to do taxes to push people out. Like when you have a lease, particularly, even if you're unregulated, if you have a lease, they shouldn't do any kind of actions to like stop your hot
Right.
water, or do these things to kind of like not clean up the place. They're required to keep the apartment and building habitable.
Right.
So what you can do is go to HP, file a harassment complaint, or file a complaint for repairs or failure to, clean and do other stuff.
Okay.
I would definitely say if it's a building-wide issue, try to organize the building, because there's power in numbers. And there's a number of tenant organizing bodies that can generally help. Like I mentioned, one, the Tenants' Rights Coalition. And I know when you said tenement, I was thinking about what we discussed before, was housing going private.
Right.
So with that, so in 2012 under Obama, things, I think it was the RAD, which is Rental Assistance Demonstration, and the Pact of the Permanent Affordability Commitment together, where there's usually have one owner or so, and there wasn't that much, regulation. And we know that nitrates in disrepair, and stuff. So I guess this case came, this particular these programs came about to kind of somewhat privatize certain public housing. From my understanding, it's about 62,000 units are going to, by 2028, will come into privatized owners somewhat. And with that they have to have major repairs within the 2 years. And every 2 years they're going to go through inspections. So I don't know how it's going to turn out, but that was, I guess, the initial goal, is to kind of take it away from public housing, because we know they're not doing the repairs. And it's our people living in these buildings. And it's a way to get the repairs and hold private managers accountable. And I know it's been a problem because they haven't done it with tenant backing, as they never do. They do things, and the people that's impact are not a part of that conversation.
So and I just want to Delort, I'm going to ask you a question in a second, but in reference to the repairs that they're making in housing in New York, this is mainly for New York City. I don't know if you're able to give advice on other states, but New York City,
New York is very tenant
New York,
tenant friendly, most part.
right? So New York City, I see that they're doing a lot of repairs in some of the in some of the NYCHA buildings. So when you said they gave it to private companies. Does this mean that by 2028 they could begin to move out those peoples because they
No,
did these repairs? Or
no.
is it just that they're managing it, but it's still
Manage
under
it
NYSHA?
different. Yeah,
Right.
and all the rent should be at least 30% of the income. I mean, it should be max, I believe, 30% of the income. It shouldn't go beyond that.
It shouldn't go beyond
So it
that. So
still remain
it's still a
for low
federal
income.
program. It's still a
Yeah,
federal program. Okay. But just under private management that are
to
going
make
to
sure, yeah,
actually
that have the
get the repair
assets.
stuff.
Yeah,
Okay. So that's actually not a bad thing.
yeah. I mean, it's always a bad thing when these large corporations doing it. I mean,
Right.
um,
All right. We got some people with their hands up. All right. So first, can you answer the question of can you discuss the Fix It website a bit? And Abia, you're gonna be next. Your hand is up. We're gonna answer you, and then we're gonna Maganiel and Yahisha about Yehuda.
Okay, so Just Fix It. It was started, I think, some time ago, by organizers, and it was a way for tenants to have concentrated information on one how to bring about um, repairs and force their landlords to do repairs, but also connect them to different agencies that can show who owns their building, if their building's been sold, um, whether they're up to code, if there's a up to date certificate of occupancy, because sometimes one defense, which I didn't bring up, that you can have is if your landlord doesn't have an updated certificate of occupancy, you may argue that they're not able to collect rent until that's fixed. So, but it's a very resourceful website. It just puts everything. It's like a one-stop shop, and it puts like a lot of different links you to a lot of different, like I said, HP, housing, preservation, development preservation, Acris, which is like all public documents that just show you where, the history of your building, like who owns it, is there mortgage, is there a lien, like you can kind of see all that stuff there. And Department of Buildings, you can see if they're, again, the certificate of occupancy, if there's violations, if they're doing work in your building and there's a stop work order, or they never really filed a work order, which is they can file a complaint with HPD. They're supposed to get work. They're supposed to get like permits and stuff to do work, particularly certain types of work. And if they fail to do that, then that's also a defense you can use, and you can file a complaint against them.
Okay, so
Melissa, was that enough?
so Abia, you're next.
Shalom, how y'all doing?
Shalom.
So,
Excellent.
So I have a question based on what Uzal had asked. So buildings that were owned privately, like mine, and then was sold over to LLC, right? And they took it over because the previous owner had a lot of violations on the building, and they claimed they sold it to this LLC. So they purchased it, still never did any repairs. Housing took over and gave them money to do repairs. They pulled out, did not do repairs or do what they were supposed to, took over by another LLC. And because of COVID, no one is doing anything. Like, so we are just stuck in apartments that's not being repaired or anything like that. What do we do?
So is it rent stabilized?
It is rent stabilized after finding out, living there like for 15 years or so. We found out it was rent stabilized. So they were overcharging us for rent. And, we did go back and forth to court, and we had a good lawyer that represented us and whatnot. But, after a while, he, I guess, moved on or whatever. So, but he helped us out a whole lot getting things done. But then this LLC took over, and then they weren't doing anything. And then housing stepped in, found out they weren't fixing the violations or anything like that. And now they're taking over. Another LLC took over.
So a lot of times they play a shell game, and it's
right.
usually the same folks doing it. Honestly, they do that a lot. But what I would do say, if you're rent stabilized, if you go on the DHCR website, You go on DHCR, yeah, there are a lot of management companies that I was looking at comments. A lot of management agencies that own different buildings, and it's a lot of different things that happen with them. And I would go to DHCR's website and file, and you can file 2 different complaints. One is if it's a building wide issue, and the other is for rent reduction order for a building wide issue, and then also for individual apartment. So what happens is DHCR will do repairs, but during that time, until we'll force the landlord to do repairs, but until they do the repairs, your rent will be reduced by whatever DHCR says it is. For deduction, I don't know, it depends on the different types of services that you're not receiving during the time that you're in, while you're renting. So landlords tend to act when they're losing money. Another option is, file a HPD case against them. I'll definitely say call 311. Keep, which I should have said before, is keep calling 311 and plain
document it.
Document.
We have done that.
The courts can look up. I can look up, and myself. Anybody can look up the address, and they can see all the complaints that the landlord has.
Right.
And what happens is if you get that, and you work with HPD because the HPD lawyers are there. You file a complaint or whatever, and if they fail to do it, so you have the court writes out an agreement. You have, they have 90 days to do this, depending on the level, because it's like A, B, C, the violations, depending on the type level violation. If they fail to do it within that time, you bring it back to court, they may be able to get contempt or civil and criminal liability. So that's also another way that landlords don't tend to want to, thank you, Melissa. She put the link for DHCR forms in there.
Thank you.
Where they tend to not, when they can possibly face prison time, jail time, or, these huge civil penalties. We've seen that when there's cases where people that live in rent stabilized housing, there's been a building fire, and the landlords move their feet. And these people they have to move to different places or whatever, and landlords drag their feet to return these tenants to their apartment. The one good thing is that when you do have a building fire and your rent stabilized, DHCR allows you to pay $1 rent to kind of just keep your tenancy going. But with respect to that, those are 2 ways to really kind of force their hand. But I would definitely say DHCR, because then you can have your rent reduced as soon as possible. They want you with the rent reduction order. They want you to do notice to your landlord. So I generally would send certified return receipt or certified letter, so you can track it. Giving them time to do the repairs, and you have the proof too, but you also have the DHCR stuff, and if you have court papers, and you can send to them as listen, we already tried. They're on notice that these repairs should be done. They failed to do it. I'm seeking this rent reduction order because they failed to keep up with their end of the bargain. Basically, it's a contract. Each party that signs to a contract is supposed to comply with their part of the contract. So, yeah.
I feel some of these people have hookups in certain departments, because right before they know inspection is coming, they would come 2 days before and start doing stuff, so they won't get
definitely. I would say if you reach out to because if you I know you said you had counsel before, but sometimes organizations know people in different places,
right,
and can kind of guide you to the right place. So if there's an instance where it seems because people get paid out of pocket. I mean, the government, we know people get paid, and there's all kinds of stuff, all kinds of crazy stuff. But yeah, try to see if you can talk to somebody else, or say, I want to talk to your supervisor. I don't think, you're reporting this right, or try to scare them a little bit and document who they are, what they're saying. You make sure you have your pictures and your documentation.
It's been a struggle. We have had the Flatbush Coalition working with us, having meetings and going out downtown, but this was all before COVID. So now COVID happened, nobody wants to do anything,
So try, you're in what area?
Flatbush.
Okay, so reach out to call at the our hotline number and see if you could be connected to our Tenants Right Coalition that deal with Flatbush,
Mm-hmm.
and see if they can represent your building and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that, because they do individual work and pod work,
Right.
which is well, building work and individual work. So
Okay.
yeah.
All right. I'll reach back out again because they were working with us. They were having meetings every Thursdays or every other
Who is
Thursday.
it?
Trying to
Aga?
get.
I'm trying to remember. It's
I'm
like
not. I'm
Aga
not
and
sure of
something.
the name because Abib was mostly going to the meetings because I'm
Okay.
still at work. But
Yeah. Oh yeah, you're
you know,
over by Court Street.
yes, I'm still at work. Still here. But he's been going to most of the meetings and whatnot. But I'll look into it again and see if we can get some type of work.
Yeah, and definitely see now, because like I said, we're representing, because of with COVID and all this, we're kind of expanding our representation. So
Mhm.
it's worth a try.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the info. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it, bro.
Okay, no problem.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Abia. So just before we move on to the next hand, Samal Zakar, who works for NYC Housing Authority. He said, as a part of agreement, this is for the people on YouTube who can't see the messages. As a part of the agreement, the management companies must still keep that New York housing. As part of the agreement, the management company must still keep New York City housing authority units affordable, allowing developers to manage the New York City Housing Authority properties, allows the units to be repaired faster and cheaper in theory. Many times,
I'm glad you said that.
yeah, in theory. So,
Execution is something different.
yeah, many times LLCs are the same owners. So they just basically, they're the same people, and they just go, like you said, a shell company. They just go from an uncle to a nephew to an uncle, and they know how to play the game because they try to control everything that has to do with housing. So the next hand, Maganio.
Hello, thank you. Um, yeah, I was just I have some questions, but I just wanted to say, like I said, I've for the Housing Authority for 30 years, and somebody was reading my mind while, things were going on, because they put up that RAD conversion guidebook.
Yes.
And it just so happens that that's Beach 41st. I used to manage that development, and that especially after Hurricane Sandy, a lot of the developments in Far Rockaway had a lot of issues. There were a lot of other issues that were going on out there, and they were kind of forgotten, as far as Beach 41st and Ocean Bay, and part of Ocean Bay fell under that RAD conversion guidebook. Usually the NYCHA developments that end up under RAD, or those developments over a certain period, they're considered problematic developments, as far as there not enough repairs being done, or poor rent paying is going on, and NYCHA is having a difficult time. There's a lot of court cases. So like you said, in theory, they come in and they redo, they refurbish everything, but it's not really quality stuff. Because before I retired, they had people were complaining and coming to some of our meetings, and like you said, it gets political with what gets done. But I would say that it's definitely strength in numbers. And I would recommend, because a lot of times, even though I work for the Housing Authority on the side, I would give them, but you didn't hear it from me, so I would give them information, and it's the people, we're waking up. So it's time for us to start working together. So if people decide to do a rent strike or anything like that, to to put that money, like you said, either pay it or put it in escrow, so the money's sitting there. Because I always tell my residents anyway, if you're not happy, I wouldn't exactly tell them not to pay their rent, but I would say if that's what you're going to choose to do, I would put it in the courts because emergencies come up. And then if housing makes good on their repairs and now you don't have the money, now you got a situation there and they're gonna say we did our part. But some RAD conversions have been good, some others not so much. Tenants associations for those in public housing and even tenants associations in the private definitely need to stay on, work together and work as a unit, because the individual that says, well, all they're gonna do is argue, that might be the case, but you still have to fight to do that, because this also will be a perfect example of divide and conquer. If you have individuals, some people know a little something, some don't, some are afraid, like you said, some people took the first offer that was given to them because they were pressured, they got them a loan. So it has to be done. But okay. My question is, what if you abandon the apartment and resident skips out? In terms of how does that work in terms of does the landlord would still have to wait? I mean, because I know someone and they've been out for at least 6 months. They haven't been in that apartment. They left like actually just before everything jumped off in March.
I mean, I think you should still file paperwork.
Right.
And then if anything, have everything done, serve process, all that other kind of stuff. And then if anything, have a default, you get a default judgment from the court because the person never appeared, but that protects that person. If the other party doesn't come, then you have that protection, and it's a default, because you don't want them to come. You don't want something to potentially happen and just say, well, I wasn't served or whatever like that. I think
right.
It's just the right thing to do. Just go through the process.
And
yeah.
let's see, someone put the Fix It website up there.
Yes.
What about, do you consider elder abuse in a situation where the elder, like I had mentioned earlier before we started, this woman's 85 years old and this particular resident has not been paying and taking advantage of her, and by not paying her rent. She has a good heart. She wanted to help this person out. You would just say, just go ahead and continue the process the papers. I mean, it's 4 years
That's
though,
what
but I guess
that's what you'd have to do. I mean,
yeah,
because you can't engage in self-help.
right.
A person should call 311 and get advice. Housing court answers, I believe. But they can't, engage in the self-help, and they have to go through the process.
And what
The thing
about
is that in New York, if anyone, and I say this to everybody who if you want someone staying on your couch, if they're there for over 30 days, that's a problem.
Right.
You definitely want if they know their rights, they can tell you they refuse to move, to leave, and you have to take them to court.
Yeah.
Generally when it's family, it's usually like a family court thing, but when it comes to like, if you have a friend stay over, if that person say day 29, you got to go. Like, I need you to leave, because you just don't want to be in that situation where you're going through a whole court process, which can be a very long process.
Okay. Last question. Has this changed a legal apartment, a basement apartment? Isn't it what makes it legal is having a 2 entrances or exits?
Well, it has to go through it should be on the certificate of occupancy. That's what makes it legal. Once it's recognized by the apartment building, it's a rentable apartment. That's what makes it legal.
Okay.
When the certificate of occupancy can be updated to include that as a part of it, and it'll say it's residential.
Oh, okay.
All right. Thank you, brother Maganio.
Thank you.
So I think someone else had their hand raised, and I might have lowered it by mistake. Is it Janet? Did you have your hand raised, or Leslie? I could be wrong. Oh, Yaisha. All right, go ahead, Yaisha. You could go ahead and ask your question.
Shalom.
Shalom.
Well,
Thank you. It was a wonderful presentation, and I'm so glad that this information is about. I am a licensed real estate agent in New York City, and I remember like trying to find people of apartments based on, you know, some of the requirements of some of the programs that they have in vouchers. And it was almost like being almost, I don't want to say impossible, but very difficult, because the income, you know, the income requirements for some of these apartments and what the landlord is willing to do, you know, didn't correlate at all. And
Mhm.
when you were talking about NYCHA, I remember years ago when I'm an ex-employee of NYCHA, so I can speak freely. I
Make sure we're
remember,
still on this call.
yes, I can speak freely because I don't work for them anymore. I think that these repairs were purposely not done because they would always be threatening us like, these are, you know, you're going to lose your job because these you know, these units are going to be privatized or privately managed, so to speak. Because remember, all the other housing developments, public housing in other states have been torn down or, you know, revamped. So New York City was like the last of, you know, major cities that had them. So they would always be telling us that, you know, you better. So they would do this thing where once I think HUD would come and do this major inspection. And if we scored low, they would come every year until we if you scored high, they wouldn't come back for maybe 4 years or something like that. I could be wrong.
It was a
And I
year.
remember,
Yeah,
oh
2 years.
yeah, you got it. Yeah,
It was 2 years. Yeah, I remember
thank
that
you. You
headache.
know,
Yeah.
ex
Hmm.
NYCHA employee, you know the deal. So anyway, right? So this particular time we scored like I think three out of five. So that was low. So they're coming back the next year. And I said to myself, you know, there were things that was not being done. So I know that, you know, the whole thing, like the brother said on the line, that, you know, it's a cheaper way. So you don't have to pay a state or city employee to do it. You don't have to worry about unions or anything like that. You get you know, outsource the job. But the thing about it is when they say that, oh, it's always going to be protected under this rent stabilization or under I think it's income. I forget the word that was used, but it's
Yeah,
always
NYCHA
going to
is
be
not rent stabilized, so that's a whole different.
Right.
okay. It's not rent stabilized, but it's
Yeah.
always going to be protected. I don't necessarily agree with that because there were many people at one point. NYCHA had what they called like what they call ceiling rent, where it would stop at a certain point.
Mm-hmm.
That stopped long time ago. People, whatever income you made, your income is based on that, what you make. I mean, your rent, excuse me, is based on what you make. There's no limit. And some people pay some exorbitant rents in NYCHA housing project. The only benefit is that they don't pay utilities as of now, because that can change as well. And with the private management, some of the laws that once protected people can, you know, slowly but surely they start to push and push and push. And if people don't go to, like, you know, town hall meetings or fight it in court, you'll be surprised when you see laws change. It's the same thing with rent stabilization. I lived in a building that was once Mitchell-Lama. Mitchell-Lama expired, I
Yep.
think it was in 2007, I believe. And I remember because it was on C-SPAN. So they didn't renew the Mitchell-Lama thing. And what they did was they kept doing what you call major capital improvement, minimal repairs, call it a major MCI, and the rents were
But
exorbitant.
that's also, so the law changed in June 2019, which is
Okay.
HSTPA.
Mm-hmm.
So now landlords can't do the repairs they used to do. It was major capital improvement, which is building wide,
Mm-hmm.
and individual apartment improvement, which is individual apartments. So
Mm-hmm.
landlords can't do that blanket, oh, we're just going to do these improvements and say, you know, charge you this amount. And it was like very little protections over that. With the change in new law, landlords can't really, they don't have the same wiggle room at all.
Okay, so in 2019, because I'm writing this down because you're
Yeah, June
educating me now.
2019. It's called the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act,
Housing
HSTPA.
stability. Okay, because I saw situations where I remember in some of the major apartment complexes here in New York City, and I'm not going to name them, where they would like keep, I guess the Tenants Association and DHCR would keep bringing, you know, the landlord to court, and the landlord would have, like, let's say 7 times to go back to court, and they keep, they would keep using every time. But the thing about it is that some of the repairs that they were doing was not necessarily something that the tenant was responsible for. And some of them even got,
there's repairs and there's improvements. It's like a
yes,
different.
but some of the improvement, like now, there's city grants that give them money and they still would bill the tenants. And I saw them pressure
Those are
elders.
J51 tax benefits that they have, yeah,
Yes,
which they
and
can't do that.
you're up. So now, since this 2019, what did you say? Housing stability and what?
House Stability and Tenant Protection Act.
And Tenant
Protection Act.
Protection Act. Thank you so much, because I'm learning this, because I want to learn it, because when you have people coming to you talking about help me find an apartment, and you're trying to let them find something suitable that they can afford, that, and they're not going to be evicted the next year when the voucher runs out or whatever the case may be. And I think that's pretty much it. Thank you very much. And
No
I'm
problem.
going
And
to,
there's these are people in general. So the New York City Human Rights Commission, if someone has a voucher or some kind of program that they're under and their landlord refuses to rent to them, or some of these landlords actually say, like, I'm not renting to these programs, they can file a complaint with the Human Rights Commission, and a claim will be brought against them by the Human Rights Commission, be in trouble, and they end up paying a lot of money.
My sister,
That's
who ends
true.
up paying the price for that? People like me.
I
Because
know.
legally, a real estate agent has to show you that place.
A friend of mine has the same issue.
The landlord says all
she
this
was
stuff,
named in
and
one.
then the real estate agent who has the license with the state of New York ends up getting sued. And we're not the one who is holding the prejudice, it's the landlord.
Yeah.
And that's something that I never agreed with. And the landlords would say, well, I'm not, but see, now the laws are getting stricter, and I'm glad, because I was tired of being held in the breach for something that I was not.
Wasn't you.
It wasn't me, it was the landlord.
Well, I'll tell you that I'm also a real estate agent, and it's our responsibility, if we're going to represent a landlord and get them people to move in. Once they use that language, we have to let them know that it's against the law to do that. And if they choose not to do that, then we have a right to step away from them. Because like you said, you don't want the blame to be put on the agent when it wasn't the agent.
Or your license to be revoked, because it can very well happen. And I've had to walk away from some things because these landlords were doing things that were absurd. But I'm glad that 2019, I was reading that some of the laws had changed, and I'm glad they did. I know some real estate agents got over on some of these things, so it sounds odd me disagreeing with it, but it never helped me, because I tried to do my job with some kind of ethics, what I mean?
Right.
But thank you so much. I appreciate this. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, thank you both. I have a couple of questions here that maybe you might be able to answer, that I know things that people have done. What if you live in a decrepit apartment and you make your own repairs? Can you recoup that money from the landlord, or you repair at your own risk?
You can try. I tell people not to, because it's a contract and they're required to do these repairs by law. So you shouldn't. I mean, you could possibly take them to small claims, depending on how much it is, and try to get it out. Or if you have a non-payment case, you can try to negotiate. I've done that before, negotiate and have it deducted from the rent.
Right.
But yeah, I think you should definitely not try to do it yourself. And again, if it's rent stabilized, file a complaint with the HCR, and even if it's not, you can still, and if it's rent stabilized, you can file a complaint with HPD and call 301 and just keep filing complaints and let an inspector, and HPD inspectors throughout COVID, they've been coming out and doing inspections.
Right.
Can't you file for HP cases even with private, even regulated?
Yeah,
if you
you
start an HP case, they usually give you, depending on the
private or unregulated. It doesn't. I mean, private, regulated, and or not regulated. HPD case for any kind of housing.
Right, because then they send the inspector out and they give them a certain amount of time, and then maybe if you have to go back, you can tell them, listen, I'll get this done. Then you can ask before the judge.
No, well, if they don't get it done, if the court says they have a certain amount of time, I think from 90. Like I said, it depends on the type of violation. There's ABC. violations. If they don't get it done, then you can bring it back, and try to get contempt and
Yeah.
civil and criminal liabilities
Then
against
there's
them.
rent, what is that word that housing lawyers
Abatement,
hates? Yeah, there you go.
rent abatement.
Yeah, they don't want to hear that. Right?
Yeah. So
All right, so right here, Zakardan, performing your own repairs can become a liability issue. It is always best to have the landlord perform the repairs in residential units.
yep.
Okay, the next question is, and this is for the person who's in a rent stabilized apartment, but now let's say they want to, all right, I want to get out of New York City. I want to take my talents down south or out west or wherever.
Went to-
and they have a rent stabilized apartment. Two things. Sub leasing the apartment, right? And the next thing is, what is a fair price for New York City for a buyout where a landlord could buy you out?
Okay, so that one is, it all depends.
Depends on where you live.
Depends on that. Depends on a lot of different things. Your emotional ties to the community. It's all these different things you can bring in when you're factoring it. Like for me personally, where I live, yeah, it has to be a lot. I mean, the
They
maximum.
got to be moving you into a house.
I mean, you know, but like I think I landed the most he's offered besides moving me into some nonsense for 10 years rent free. Was I think I don't either 350 or 450. That is nowhere near the number because I know he has air rights to this building.
Right.
I've raised my children here and all kind of things. Like I'm close to every freaking thing. I can just walk pretty much.
Yeah. You could walk across the Manhattan. You could cross.
Yeah, like I'm the Long Island Railroad is like 2 blocks away. It's just like everything. But generally I talk to a real estate person and all that kind of stuff. It all depends with that question. With respect to if you want to move out, I would say find out first if you live with a family member, if somebody wants to take over the apartment. DHCR has a form where you can say it has like family members. You can list the family members that may be entitled to succession rights.
Right.
I've advised tenants to, even though they're not required to send it to DHCR and send it to their landlord, but DHCR would give them notice like, no, you should send it to the landlord, but it kind of put DHCR on notice that, listen, I've already told my landlord about this, the pen taking over the apartment. I would say do that first because, you're not going to find rents here and you may want to come back unless your family has it, it's still within the family. And you'd have to look at the lease as far as what it says about subleasing and stuff like that.
Okay, so we have
the initial lease thing.
So we have
Thank you, Melissa.
Sister Melissa. She's giving us all the.
I
hope that everyone.
Melissa, you want to introduce yourself? She kind of, if you're willing to talk.
I work in the housing arena, and I'm really great at getting information. I'll say that.
She's a tenant advocate. She's amazing.
Yes,
That's
and
great.
a tenant advocate.
That's great. So I'm trying to paste some of this stuff over to YouTube. For those of you that might not see this again, you can go to the DCB channel, Bake DCB, and you can share the link with everyone that might have missed this stream tonight. Very important. I don't know why so many people. I mean, the information that we got tonight was for everyone. Everyone. If you lived in housing, if you lived in a private building, wherever. I mean, there was information for everything here. So let me see. Sorry, could you say the name of the compliant agency? All right. So I think that was it for my questions. I always come with questions out of the blue because I try to think out the box and try to put scenarios. So once again, if no one has any more questions, I would like to thank my sister Azaniah, Corinthia Azaniah Carter, for coming out, taking time out of her schedule tonight and this evening to be able to school us all on all the laws and all of the things and all of the rights that you have as tenants and all of the things that you could do in order to protect yourself and protect your family, your loved ones. And thank you, my sister, once again.
No problem. Let me just put this number in the chat if anybody
Okay.
wants to reach out to our organization if you have questions.
Yes.
And again, it's open to everyone to get free legal advice. And, you know, people that have active housing cases, then they may get.
This is the number for, what's the name of the
It's for Legal Services NYC. That's our hotline. I'll write it
Legal
down.
Services NYC hotline number? Let me
Spelled it wrong.
write it over here. Legal Services NYC.
And again, we also cover a number of different civil legal issues, so people can call for that too. I know we had a lot of calls when people were getting their unemployment. We have like some kick-ass unemployment.
So
And
the
workers'
number is for legal service. The hotline number for Legal Services NYC is 917-661-4500. Once again, Legal Services NYC hotline number is 917-661-4500. And don't call asking for Sister Corinthia.
Yeah, right.
Because it's a hotline.
Yeah, you won't. It'll be filtered. It's only when I'm on rotation.
Right. It's a hotline. So she's giving us the she's giving us the information now so that it could be easier for us. And I'm sure that if you really need some advice, that I could get you in contact with her, and you'll be able to speak to her privately and be able to get that legal advice that you need. Once again, thank you, my sister. Hopefully we could do this again. You could keep us informed with everything as is happening, as the courts open back up. Maybe you could show us some of the things that are happening, and that way we could keep the community informed.
The new
Thanks
changes.
for having me.
Thank you. Hey, thank everyone. I thank everyone that joined in tonight, taking time out of your evening and joining us. And may the Most High God bless each and every one of you. Shalom, shalom.
Shalom, shalom.
All right, thank you guys. Thank you for coming on. Really appreciate it.